Hi there, welcome to episode 2 of the OUA basketball show. My name's Griffin Porter. We had a lot of action this week to kick off our season, so let's just get right into it. We got the year started on Tuesday. Western women win over Windsor in a 65-64 nail-biter, but Lancers getting the split in the men's game with a 92-84 victory. That's part of a 3-0 start for the Windsor men's side, who are making me look good for picking them in our season preview episode last week. Of course, a lot of that's been on the back of Thomas Kennedy. He's averaging more than 21 points and 16 rebounds to start the season. Just classic Thomas Kennedy numbers down in Windsor. Over on the women's side, it was the University of Ottawa Gee-Gees. They played a really entertaining season opener against McMaster. They won that by 2. And then the U of T Varsity Blues, big win for them, taking down the defending national champs, their crosstown rivals, the TMU Bold, 61-57. Those were just some of the great games in our first week, but one of the games of the week was certainly the Carleton men pulling off a huge comeback against McMaster. Here with me to talk about our other defending national champions here in the OUA is Mark Colley from the Charlatan. So here with me to talk about that big game of the week that took place in Ottawa is Mark Colley, a sports writer extraordinaire for the Charlatan, Carleton's independent student newspaper. Mark, thank you so much for coming on the OUA basketball show.
Griffin, always good to chat.
Yes, it is. We were saying before we hit the record button, it's been a long time. I, of course, used to stomp around Carleton campus when I covered the team, and I didn't want to get into Carleton this early in the season, but they were pretty interesting this week. We talked on our season preview episode about how on this men's team we didn't really know a ton of these faces, and they maybe introduced themselves to us with a really great game against McMaster on Saturday night.
Yeah, it was kind of surprising. I mean, same Ravens as old. We expected them to come out and have a pretty familiar performance as they do against most teams, but it turned out to be a really interesting game. They didn't lead until partway through the fourth quarter, and they only won the game because they went on a 20-2 run to start the fourth quarter, but until then, it wasn't looking so great for them, and they trailed by as much as 13 at some points earlier in the game. So it turned into a really interesting game, and definitely a lot of takeaways to talk about and things that we're going to be watching for the rest of the rest of the way.
Yeah, one thing I love about head coach Taffy Charles, no matter what the situation, he always coaches with the exact same level. Did you see any sort of like relief in him after the comeback, or was it just he was probably just upset that they needed a comeback in the first place?
Yeah, I find that when they win by a small margin or when they lose, which obviously is rare. I've only covered 2 Ravens losses over the past, 3 years, but the wins by narrow margins and the losses are the ones where he's the most calm post-game and the most happy with his team seemingly. But the games where they win by a lot is when he comes out and he's saying, I'm not happy with how we did. But in terms of this game directly, I think the moment that sticks out in my mind is at the end of the first quarter, between the first and second quarter, he threw his clipboard at the ground, which I had never seen him do before. I mean, that. Obviously you'll see him stomp around and you'll see him upset about all tons of stuff, and he'll be yelling at refs and he'll be yelling at players and he'll be screaming and moving his arms and all those sorts of things. But I've never seen him throw a clipboard, so that was something that stood out to me.
Yeah, maybe a bit of a wake-up call for his team there. Also, just genuinely, I think one of the nicest people in OUA basketball, a very kind man, Coach Charles, off the court. But yeah, so this team, obviously, I think the discussion of it right now has to start with Aiden Warnholtz. Aiden's been with Carleton for a couple of seasons now. He was a backup point guard during their 2020 championship season when they had those great guards, Munis Tutu and Yassine Joseph. And then last year, even with Alain Louis, he was sort of not always in the starring role. And now Aiden Warnholtz is the star point guard. What have you seen from Aiden to start this season?
Yeah, he had a really good opening weekend. I mean, he dropped 30 points against McMaster, which is kind of the thing that held them from losing, along with Grant Shepard, who is kind of moving into a starting role this year. He transferred from UBC during the COVID year. He dropped 20 rebounds on Saturday against McMaster, and him and Warnholtz were the two pieces that really helped them get over the edge. In terms of Warnholtz, you've definitely seen him progress a lot. I mean, last season he was good at times. He started every game. He was really strong, but kind of the greatness of him could come and go. He could be phenomenal at some moments, dropping 3 or 4 straight three-pointers and just changing a game on a dime, and then that three-pointer stroke disappears and he can't hit anything and it gets kind of ugly. So it was kind of hit or miss with him, and I think this year what he's been able to do, and what he's looking to do for the whole season, is to be a little bit more consistent and be able to do that all the time instead of just being a little bit come and go. But I think we saw that in the game against McMaster, dropping 30 points and really making a difference. And he kind of got the ball rolling. He dropped, I think it was 3 3-pointers in the second quarter where the Ravens kind of steadied themselves and said, okay, we could do this. They didn't actually take the lead until the fourth quarter, but it kind of steadied the ship and stopped the bleeding a little bit. I find it interesting that Taffy Charles, as much as, he loved the fact that Aiden Warnholtz had a good game and the fact that Grant Shepard had a great game, he was concerned that most of the production was only from those two guys. He was concerned that the team was essentially carried by them over the course of the weekend. And even on Friday, it was kind of the Shepard and Warnholtz show instead of anyone else. So he said he wanted to see more production out of kind of the 3 through 8 spots in the starting roster so that they are a deeper team that has to rely less on two guys, that when those two guys maybe don't show up, if there's an injury or they just have a bad game, this team could be really screwed. And that's what Taffy Charles would like to see improve over the next few games.
Yeah, and it's always like, that's the Carleton thing, is as good as their top players have been, whether you go back to the Scrub Brothers or Kaza Kajami Keene or Lloyd Pandy, like the 3 through 8s, like they never have a guy who scores 35 points a game. Like it's the team that always gets it done. So with that in mind, is there a name that you think maybe outside of Ottawa, OUA fans might not know yet, but might be someone who you've got your eye on, and it's maybe a couple years from now, the name everyone will be talking about in Carleton?
Yeah, I think the guy to keep an eye on, at least right now, is Wazir Latif. I think he played a little bit last year. I don't think he actually started a game last year, but he got some minutes, and he redshirted the 2019-2020 season when the Ravens also won the championship. But this year he's kind of transitioning into a starting role for the first time. He's replacing those guys that we talked about, Lloyd Pandy, Alain Louis, Biniam Gebrekkinen, Cordell Vieira. All of them are gone now. So Wazir Latif is one of the younger guys who's having to step up and fill that role, and we haven't really seen it so far in the preseason and in these first 2 games of the season. He hasn't really flexed his muscles that much, but I think he's going to be one of the guys that the Ravens not just rely on this year, but someone who could fill a big spot in years to come. And, when the time comes that Aiden Warnholtz leaves or Grant Shepard's going to leave at the end of this season, like I think Wazir Latif is one of those guys that we're going to see take on not just a bigger role on the court, but a bigger role off the court as well, as sort of a leader of this team.
All right, well, there you have it. Mark Colley, thank you so much for stopping by. Where can the people find your excellent words on the Carleton Ravens basketball team and anything else you might happen to write about?
Yeah, well, you can keep track of my stuff on my Twitter. That's at Mark Colley, MarkColley. And then, of course, you can read The Charlatan, which has great coverage of not just basketball, but all Carleton sports, and that's charlatan.ca.
Yeah, a lot of good journalism students out there at Carleton University. Mark, thanks again. It's been a blast. A big thanks again to Mark for coming on. I know you guys see the hat up there. I promise it's not going to be a Carleton show, but come on, had to get Mark on here early on in the life of the OUA basketball show. He's a great basketball writer. We've got a lot more OUA action coming up this weekend. If you want some picks for fun games that I'm going to be keeping an eye on, there's a Wednesday night rivalry game in the 6th, U of T hosting TMU. And then on Friday night, I think York and McMaster women. That's going to be a really great game. And then for the men, I like the Lakehead Brock game. They're going to play twice this weekend. That's 2 teams that I'm interested to see. Lakehead 2-0. Let's see where they can go. All right. Thanks again for watching, guys. My name's Griffin Porter. It's been a blast. We'll catch you next week here on the OUA Basketball Show.